Okay, well, in the interest of time, I will kick this off. Thank you all for joining us today. This is part of the CWDL webinar series on key mortgage topics for our clients and our friends in the industry. And it's our first one this year. So welcome, everybody. We are thrilled to have industry experts, Garrett and Michael McAuley, principals at Garrett and Michaeley and Company, with us today to discuss essential strategies for 2023. Both Joe and Mike are industry experts and have extensive backgrounds in the mortgage banking space. So they'll be joining Dustin Pfluger, who's our partner of mortgage banking, and founder and managing partner of CWDL, Mark Wilson. Couple of housekeeping items. If you guys have questions, please put them in the chat. We will do our best to get to all of them today. If we don't, we'll circle back up with you. We encourage all kinds of interactions, so please feel free to ask away. Other than that, let's get started.
Thanks, Casey.
You're on mute, Dustin.
Dustin, I'll tell you, you're on mute.
There we go. All right, already starting off on good foot. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Casey, for doing the introduction. Let's go in and stuff like that. So, and thanks for Mike and Joe for joining us. So I think will be a lot of informative stuff, a lot of good stuff for 2023. As I think everybody probably on here as well probably knows Mike and Joe and subscribes to their newsletter and probably seen them conferences and whatnot. So, so I guess with that, I think, we've talked about this a lot. I think people have been to our webinars before. This is basically a conversational type webinar. We have some topics we'll talk through. So I guess, most of it we're going to spend talking about 2023 and what to do in 2023. But I think just to kick it off, Mike, Joe, why don't y'all talk just a little bit about, something, talking about 2022, what mortgage companies could have done differently, or you wish they would have had done differently in 2022 to kind of come into 2023. And then we'll move into the 2023 discussion. So
Sure. Do you want me to take a shot, Joe, or you want to go first?
Why don't you start, Mike?
Sure. So anyways, thanks very much for having us. So we really appreciate the relationship with CWDL. So it's very nice you to invite us, and we're happy to talk to you today. I think 2022 is one that it's one of those years that a lot of people wish never happened. And I think probably one of the biggest things in terms of how to approach it, what people could have done differently. I think there were a lot of folks, we were among them, but I think there are a lot of observers of the industry just were encouraging people, as Joe used to say a lot, trees don't grow to the moon. So I think if you looked at late 2021, obviously a lot of the signs were there. I think people were talking about things were going to get bad and we're going to go to a down cycle. We saw a lot of companies not prepare well for that. They sort of knew that, but they didn't do a lot about it. We saw a lot of top performers actually take the steps early on and were well positioned for it and have come out comparatively well. But I think in fairness to the industry, the run up in rates was incredibly, severe and dramatic. A lot of uncertainty there in the capital markets, which really squeezed out the gain on sale and didn't give them a lot of pricing, bring down a lot of profits on the loans originated. And then the ones that were originated, the pricing competition was really severe. So it wasn't all that unlike 2018, except for the severity of it. And, I think just as a segue, Joe will handle this. We talk pretty significantly or pretty frequently about cut, and, got to get to break even. And I know a lot of companies tried to do that. And I saw a lot of folks who were doing layoffs. We typically wouldn't encourage people to do more than a couple of rounds of layoffs, but we had plenty of people who were doing 3 rounds of layoffs because nobody expected it to get quite that bad. So that's sort of my take on it. I think we probably could have, most companies could have acted a little bit earlier and not been quite as optimistic. The top performers, I think, were a little bit better.
Mike, I'll add to that along the same vein. I was thinking, gosh, there's 5 or 10 or 15 things that people should have done. And I'll just sort of narrow it down to what I think was probably the best one. And Mike started on that. And it was that the cutbacks were not done in a rational, methodical way. Almost across the board, it was a little bit of, or a lot of, let's cut 20 people and see what happens. We saw very, very few companies that came up with a plan that showed exactly how many people they had to cut, maybe included, senior officers taking a 10 or 20% pay cut for a period of time, but staying on their jobs. Maybe a plan that showed closing an operations center or two, but there were very few people that had it laid out in advance. And the ones that did had one round of layoffs, almost across the board, as opposed to 3 or 4. We've even seen some doing a 5th round now. And we always encourage people to have contraction plans that are on the shelf that they write during a period of time when things are going great, so that they don't go into kind of a panic mode trying to figure out what to do when things look gloomiest. But even if they don't do that, you can sit down and come up with a plan. A good CFO, maybe working with your audit firm, but a good CFO should be able to put together that plan, lay it out, and here's what it's going to take to get to break even.
So on that topic, this reminds me, I think, a little bit of, sorry, Mark, we could comment here in just a second, but I wanted to comment that in y'all's newsletter this week, you had a comment about that, about a mortgage company hiring somebody from outside the mortgage industry and bringing them in, and it really kind of whipped them into shape. If you, obviously not name names and stuff like that, but if you elaborate a little bit more on what, how that CFO helped, what they came in and did, and the outside perspective probably helped in that situation, I'm imagining.
Yeah, so I was running the loan side of a bank, back in the mid 80s. And we just bought the bank, and we had to find a new CFO because what they had before was very inadequate. And we found a guy who'd come out of the publishing business. He was a Deloitte partner, and he left. He went to the publishing business, didn't know anything about mortgages. And he was maybe the best CFO I ever worked with. And it was that fresh look. So this one that we wrote about in the newsletter, she was in some kind of a manufacturing business that had nothing to do with mortgages.
Maybe it had everything to do with mortgages.
Yeah. But the product and so on. But I think maybe you could argue that somebody who didn't know the industry was a little bit more effective, not being stuck with the old ways. I'm not certain how much that mattered, but it was just somebody who had a strong enough personality and a good enough view of things to understand what needed to be done. And in her case, the newsletter referred to a he, but it was actually a she, kind of to throw people off the scent. But she was just really good, and she was. They went from 4 operation centers down to 1. She had all the senior people taking 20% pay cuts. She recommended the owner go from taking a salary of $600,000 down to $60,000. I was kind of shocked that he went along with that, but a lot of it was just sort of having this attitude of no sacred cows. And we've seen too many companies when they do these 2 or 3 or 4 rounds of cuts. They're just, we can't get rid of Sally. She's part of family. She's been here 25 years. And maybe it was in part because this person was new. She didn't have any of those, those bonds. They were just.
Don't you think, Joe, the other part there was on that case where, the owners really weren't following. The owners were very unrealistic all along, right? And then finally she gave them some sense. And she probably had that, if I remember right from you telling me the story in that case, she had the plan out there for months, and just nobody wanted to act on it. There's always this optimism that mortgage companies have, which I appreciate. It's an incredibly difficult job that I don't think I'd want to do, and they have to be somewhat optimistic, especially a lot of them have production backgrounds. But at some point, the other thing, feeding on what Joe says there, and specifically, you all comment on this, Dustin and Mark, I always feel like when I talk to owners who are struggling with their businesses or who want some help, the 2 key areas I zero in on, obviously all the managers are important, the operations, the IT, the compliance, the QC, but I always zero in on the CFO and the secondary marketing people. And I just believe that those two positions are the honest brokers, I like to say. If they're doing their job properly, they're teeing up the CEO to say, if the secondary people usually know where all the bodies are buried in terms of who's getting the concessions and what the special pricing is and what kind of products do we actually make money on, and we're doing a lot of effort over here and this doesn't play out very well. they're particularly good on the loan level. The CFOs generally can be good at that as well. And I think they have to rely on a good secondary unless they have that background themselves. But they're there for everything else, the cost structure, the business strategy. And if you get a decent CFO and a good secondary marketing person, the CEO needs to listen to those people, So I don't know how you all feel about that. You work with CFOs directly, so.
Yeah. I mean, let me jump in real quick on that one. Yeah, we often talk about the CFO's job is to give the news that ownership and the CEO needs to hear, not what they want to hear. And I think in our experience, that's easier said than done, because I think CFOs are often part of the strategy in the company, and if the company isn't meeting their goals, they're hesitant sometimes to give that news to the CEO. And I would say that's not, they need to do their job. I mean, they have to deliver the news that they need to so the company can survive. I think the other part I would touch on a little bit on the cuts for 2022 that I think we were talking about, and you and everybody else was, is there was this moment coming out of 2020 and 2021 where mortgage bankers were in a state of growth and trying to digest all this volume and chase down new business. 22 hit, and all of a sudden there was this feeling of we have to cut, but all of a sudden there was opportunities for them to bring on branches and other things. So they got stuck in the middle often of, well, if I'm cutting, but I'm bringing on all these branches. Well, we had lots of conversations around that as well of, there's opportunity for a whole bunch of branches because people aren't making money. And smart companies were getting rid of the 70% of the LOs that weren't really producing, which felt like opportunities to these other operators, which I think that was one area that I would say, to answer Dustin's original question.
Here's an interesting thing, Dustin, and everybody, that we're just seeing. I've just seen this in the last month or so. People who tried all the cuts and didn't work, and so they've done a combination of some of the following. They've gone from mandatory to best efforts, and they feel that they're giving up, rightly or wrongly, they feel that they're giving up the pickup of going mandatory, but they're getting rid of all the cost of having a secondary marketing person, a hedge advisor. Secondly, companies, and I'm talking about a very small number, who have gone from delegated to non-delegated, getting rid of their underwriters. And thirdly, one company, this is pretty drastic, they decided to go just from being a banker to being a broker. They get rid of doc draw and funding and a lot of those expenses. So those are pretty extreme examples, but these guys are just, they ran into a brick wall. We've cut everything we can, and I pretty much agreed with them. And we want to survive, and we may not survive in the form that we've been doing, but we'll be around to get back into the business. So I think that's interesting.
And I think as well with that, though, I think there's a lot of, I agree with Joe in terms of, I remember coming back from the IMB conference in Nashville and just talking to various clients about what they're doing, how they're approaching it. And, if you were reading our newsletter, it's constantly cut, get to break even. But then you realized a lot of it is, a lot of the companies were making the cuts they needed to, and they pretty much cut everything they could, and they're going to lose some money. They're still going to be losing money. But I think the argument, what became pretty clear, is if they cut too much more, they're not going to be positioned when the market does improve. They're all actually cutting into sort of the core competency and the core skills they have. So Joe's example is a good one. You had certain clients who said, well, I don't need that as a core anymore. I don't need to have underwriting. I can go be delegated. I'll be I'm non-delegated. So they could, I'll just sell best efforts. But the other ones, I don't see as many companies doing what Joe's talking about. I see them more trying to survive. And if you think about it, everybody made a lot of money during, 2019 through early 2022. So some of it is you're giving back some of your retained earnings. I've kind of come to the conclusion, a lot of what you were talking about, Mark, that's what people were trying to deal with and not deal with back in 2018. It was not not a dissimilar market, but now it comes down to, if you can just ride out this current market, it's going to get better. We don't know when it's going to be, but at some point you're going to make a lot of money again. You're not going to make 2020 money, but you're going to make good money. And I think that's the cyclical nature of the business. And if you're a good mortgage banker, if you didn't get overextended and you're positioned properly, you're going to do okay. But we're seeing a lot of companies that aren't positioned properly. They weren't very good mortgage companies beginning with, going into 2019, and they got bailed out by a great market. So
Mike's absolutely right. And one of the things that we've seen is companies that have they try the cuts, doesn't get them to break even, and they're willing to lose money. They built up a lot of capital over the previous 2 years before last year, and we're okay with that. It's their money. But what we really insist on is they have a plan. They need to figure out how much money they're willing to lose, how much that will be per month, and how many months they're willing to wait. Because
and do you have liquidity in the meantime, right, Joe? I mean, do you have liquidity to ride it out? If you don't have liquidity, that doesn't work. That's when you go back into survival mode. But
yeah, exactly. And if they can afford to do that, that's fine. But just have a written plan. A real quick anecdote. This goes back right after the subprime crisis. I was at a company. I was asked to go there on behalf of the warehouse lenders, and their net worth had gone from 42 million down to 7 million. So I went down there and I met with a CFO. I didn't know the company at all, but it was in my neighborhood, so to speak. And he showed me a huge stack of repurchase demands. So I went in, I got there about 10 o'clock, 10:30, I went to the CEO, the owner, introduced myself. And I said, I'll just make up a name and say his name was Daryl. But I said, I just saw a stack of repurchase demands. Even if you were about 2/3 of them, you're going to zero. You're going out of business. And if I were you, I would go out at noon, we got half an hour, just announce that you're shutting down. Keep a skeleton crew to close out your pipeline, get your loan shipped, pay for your warehouse lenders. And, your 7 million, maybe, getting out of leases and so on, maybe you'll have a couple million left over. And he was in a big glass office and he goes, "Oh, I couldn't do that to them." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I couldn't lay off all those people. They've been so loyal to me for so long." And I said, "Don't be a schmuck." I'm not certain he knew that word, but I said, "Don't be a schmuck. They're loyal to you up until the moment that you miss a payroll. And then they're going to think you're the biggest jerk in the world." And he said, "I just can't do it to him." So I don't remember whether it was a month or 2 months, but he went to zero, lost all of that money, went from 42 million to zero. And a couple of years later, I heard he was a mortgage broker just hacking loans somewhere. So, have a plan, decide how much you're willing to lose. And at some point, if you hit that number, it's over, right?
Yeah.
You got to stop losing money.
That's exactly right. We talk about that all the time. You don't do any good by, if you last 2 more months, but you didn't make the cuts, where if you would have made the cuts, you could have survived through this market and hired all those people back when the market changed. What's the better plan? It's the slowing down the speed up once the market comes back to you. We talk about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, hibernate a little bit. Yeah, and that's the thing. And we've also been on record about making a strategic decision. There's nothing wrong. That's one option, right? You tried, you make the cuts. You don't want to go through the down cycle. You shut down. Could be hibernate, like we said a minute ago. You ride the thing out, do just servicing or whatever. But I think the other end of it is you may want to sell your company, and that's challenging, right? I mean, there's some deals that, if you look at the ones that get done out there, the ones I can think of, folks who are clients like Atlanta and Legacy Mortgage and Albuquerque, those are 2 deals that got done with Guild Mortgage. And they got done because they were very cohesive and the owners were proactive and they got on top of it. But in the end, you still have to make the cuts, because a Guild or a Freedom or whoever would be out buying people are not going to, they're not going to take your large overstaffed cost structure with them. It's just not going to happen. So you're going to have to make the cuts at some point. And it takes a while for these deals to get done. If you want to do an M&A deal versus a sell your assets, it's going to take a while to get it done. So you need to fix the business in the meantime, so you can make it to the finish line. You don't want to turn out like the Finance of America deal, where, they can't get a deal together at the very end because the word gets out that you're not viable anymore. By the time you get out there, everybody else is swooping in on your key asset, your employees.
Yeah, there's been a couple of those in the last month or two that have been public. We don't need to name names, but they've been public news that have falling apart. You hear it's happening, and then it falls apart at the last minute, and they basically just poached the branches and moved them over is basically what's happened. So,
but it's just the example that Joe gave, going, that's an old, how is that, Joe? That was like before the financial crisis, 2007. It's if you don't keep it together, you don't have anything to shut down, or to walk away from with some cash, or you don't have anything to sell, or you don't have anything to merge with somebody else.
But one thing I would add is that we see a few people now and then say, I'm just going to shut down entirely, go out of business, and I'll get back in it when it gets better. I don't know quite why, but I've been in the business 40 years now, a little bit more than that. I've never seen that happen once. The people that get out, I've just never seen them get back in. I don't know if they find something better to do, or
they try and it doesn't work out, right? I mean, they lost the magic. It's just they missed the cycle. They try to do it, they don't.
Yeah, they've lost the fire for it. It's interesting. We do have a client that it's been a long-term client of ours that called us right after the last crash. And said, hey, I'm thinking about getting back in. What do you think? We went over it, and they wrapped up, and they've had a good run. And they called us the beginning of this year and said, we're going to wind things down, and we're going to shelf the company again and get real small and just keep the minimum that we need to be approved. And we'll come back when it's time. I think those stories are not, they're far and few in between, but they do exist out
there. But it's a viable strategy. You're right, Mark. I mean, it's a viable strategy. And I think I've just come to the conclusion after my time in mortgage banking, you just got to ride out the bad period, make the cuts, do what you need to do to survive, because it will get better. And that's, I think Joe and I always end up one of our sessions about saying, don't get too discouraged. I mean, it's very discouraging now. We're the four of us are advisors on all this. They're the ones who actually have to live through it. And there's a lot of emotion. The companies we work with who want to sell, there's a lot of emotion. I completely get it, but it's just, if you can just hang in there, it will get better. It might not get better until 2024, but it's going to get better.
No, that's a guarantee, right? I mean, the one thing we know about this industry is that it's a constant state of change, from regulatory perspective to margins to all of it. It is in a constant state of change. And I like Joe's point of having a plan to deal with all of those things. What are the levers that you should be paying attention to push your decision making, right? And that's a big part of it.
Go ahead. Just on cuts and talk about emotion and all that, maybe think of this, Mike. We had a client that got purchased in 2021 based off a valuation of mid 2021. Deal closed November 1st, 2021, bought by a private equity group. Private equity gets a bad rap, I think, sometimes, but they're one of the companies that are doing well right now, because the private equity guys came in and was like, wait, we're here to make money. We're not here to, they basically took the emotion out of the decision and basically brought it back down to, stats and efficiencies and benchmarking, all that kind of stuff, and said, this is what we got to do. And to everybody's point, they had a plan of what they were doing, and they went through, and now they've been profitable in 2022. So, been an interesting piece.
And I think that's an important point. And that there are opportunities in this market to still make money, right? And there are, we do have clients who have made the cuts, that are doing what they need to do, and are taking on the opportunities, but meeting the support staff to fill that. People are doing more.
It's just the thing is, it's just brutal on the origination. I don't think I've seen it be so difficult on the origination side in terms of profitability, because if even the loans that are out there, this would normally be a very good cycle for the purchase money originators. And we all know the basic reasons: the lack of inventory and the competition that's there, and the margins are just bad. The gain on sale margins are bad. The competition's too high. But I mean, Joe and I together, we do probably 40 reviews a year on mortgage companies, whether it's for warehouse banks, or they hire us directly, or banks hire us because they want to buy a mortgage company. And it's interesting. On all that, I've only seen 2 of them they're small, that actually make money on origination. They caution me, I'm not going to make money on the first quarter of 2022. 2023, I won't make it on 2023, but they actually made money on origination. And it comes down to, a good mix of government loans where there's some better margins, still are better margins on it. keeping their cost structure in line, having good secondary execution, but a lot of variation where they can sell best efforts or mandatories, or they can do AOTs, or they can go directly to the agencies if they need to. I mean, a lot of these components are there, and they're not in competitive markets as much. But that's 2 companies out of 40 companies that we visited.
Yeah.
And it's not entirely representative of the industry, but it's not way off.
It's a good sample for sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the big components that we haven't talked about, and given the market that we're in, and this comes up, and is LO comp. And you're right on the origination side. It's if this was a different industry, if this was Ford Motor Company and they were losing money every time they made a car, they would do something about it. And for some reason in this industry, the manufacturing component of a loan, a big component of that is LO comp. And I think, obviously the loan officer is often the customer of the mortgage bank. And so they're hesitant to push on that compensation structure. That being said, I think, and we talked about this a lot in 2018, and then it went away, and now we're back, but it's an obvious spot. So, we also encourage clients to look at their business model and look at that, because if you can't make any money, building or manufacturing that loan, you ought to do something about that. Yeah. Or go ahead.
No, I say, Mark, you're spot on. The people that somehow think that magically they're going to be able to cut loan officer commissions from 110 basis points to 105, they're kidding themselves. You're exactly right. You've just got to rethink your model.
Yeah, I mean, it's if your loan officer can do an extra 2 deals a month, or 3 deals, 4 deals a month at a lower comp, but and your best ones are willing to participate in that, and maybe that's an area that's worthwhile looking. And I know that's tough. I mean, I understand that it's tough, but if you're not making money every time you originate a loan, why are you originating a loan?
Right. Yeah. If you got loan officer commissions, they go somewhere else. So it's just got to be a whole different model.
Yeah.
There's a variety of different models. I wanted to add 2 things, actually, if I may. One of the things that Mike says that just really is good is that you've got to make a strategic decision about your company, because if you don't, a decision will be thrust upon you. And we know what that means. But I was going to say, I want to get down to a little micro thing. We hear people using, I think it's called OptiFinder, to help you pick which of your warehouse lines to use on a given loan. And from what I've seen, it's pretty nifty software, but I'm really opposed to the whole concept. I think in tough times, one of the things you really want to work on is maintaining a good relationship with a warehouse lender. If you're treating them as someone who you're only going to give them business when, you save money and they don't make as much money, they're not going to be as friendly toward you as they might otherwise be. You want to have a relationship that's built on more than just squeezing out every basis point, because during tough times, you may need that warehouse lender for you.
So that's like, as you know, Joe, that's near and dear to my heart, because I like the people at OptiFunder. They're great people. They do a good product, but I just kind of come at it thinking, it's not about just picking the bank that has the cheapest pricing on your plain vanilla loans. It's very good at kind of putting all that together in terms of add the fees and the haircuts and the, what the base pricing is and what any kind of floors are on the rate and that type of thing. But it doesn't take into account, wait a minute, I'm also selling this other warehouse bank who costs a little more, but they're buying portfolio product for me, which my LOs really want, or they're giving me construction perm financing, which the plain vanilla bank won't do. All that stuff goes there. And then some of them, it's a function also that they've just been through a lot of down cycles and they'll ride it out with you. And to some degree, I was a warehouse lender for a lot of years, so I'm sort of preaching that because that's where I was coming from on a lot of it. But it's interesting. I just talked to a very large, successful company, and it was, he said, "Hey, what do you think about OptiFunder?" And just, we're picking on OptiFunder, but something whether it's OptiFunder or something identical by a vendor. And, I said what Joe just said, what I just said on it, my take on it. And the guy said, yeah, that's sort of how I feel too. We had this new treasurer manager came in who used it as his last job and really felt strongly, but I just don't think it's taken into account all the key things that are there in the relationship. And I thought, wow, that's a very large, successful company, a guy who's been in the business a lot of years, who's kind of figured that out. And he sees that even though everyone's trying to cut expenses, and the other thing I would say on that, I mean, I know we have a lot of CFOs on the call right now. When I talk to CEOs and they say, what do you think about about an OptiFunder, that kind of approach? I said, it's not cheap, first of all. Secondly, if you've got if you only have 2 warehouse lines, you're a small company, it's not that complicated to figure out which one I'm going to fund under, what the advantages are, disadvantages. If you're somebody big who's got a dozen warehouse lines, well, presumably you're also somebody who's big and you've got people who can produce a lot of that themselves. They can do their own optimization individually, and maybe it's not going to be as perfect as OptiFunder might be, but what it does do, it's not going to cost you money every time you use the thing for, in perpetuity. So anyways, that you hit one on there, Joe. That happened to be, I know we had that on our list, and that's near and dear to my heart.
And I was just going to say that when things get really ugly, and going back to when Mike was running warehouse lending at Chase and some other places, when things get ugly, guys like Mike, your warehouse lender, they can decide, let's give this guy, another day or another week or another month, or they can decide no. And if all you've used him for is when you, get the cheapest rate, he may not be as inclined to help you out.
So, Mike, I think. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to ask Mike real quick about. To not leave that topic real quick on. Mike, from your experience, you've been through this cycle. You've been through a couple of cycles as a warehouse bank, and we had this as an agenda point. Like, what makes a good relationship? Like, what do you like to see out of the group? To get that best relationship both ways? What do you see from that perspective, from a warehouse perspective, to make the relationship the best it possibly can?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think a lot of it comes down to a couple of things. I think you want somebody, an easy approach if I'm a CFO or if I'm a bank, is, hey, how smart do I want my warehouse bank to be? Because it's a path of least resistance. If they don't press me too hard, then it's, that's one less thing for me to worry about. I got plenty of other things to worry about. But I think the more important thing, it's a little bit what Mark said earlier about the CFO being willing to deliver bad news to you. A good warehouse lender is it could be delivering bad news to you, saying, hey, your liquidity is tough. And, Joe made the point earlier, if you want to go into survival mode or have a contraction plan, or if you want some help from your warehouse bank, I was on the other end of it, as you say, Dustin. And the key was, I had people say, hey, I can't make payroll next week. Can I get some help from you? And the first question out of my mouth is, well, do you have a cash flow statement? Do you have any kind of projections? Can you show me what you're going to do? Hey, I'm about to blow my covenant on the big one. Now we see is people blowing covenant on rolling earnings. So they have good liquidity, the leverage is low, but they're not making money. So the warehouse bank pretty much has that as a tripwire. And you could say, gosh, well, why do they need to have that? Why do you care? Instead, it's more they want to have the discussion with you. And if you have a decent argument, they want to see that you're thinking ahead, that you're actually you're going to be able to, you've thought strategically about your business, or you've thought at least tactically, how am I going to get to the other side, that I'm not going to burn through all my cash. So I think I was talking to a warehouse lender, last week, and they're considered one of the more conservative ones in the industry. But they've been through 3 or 4 cycles, they know, and they've got credibility when some warehouse bank is getting out of the business. That I used to get this all the time. Suddenly the chief credit officer or all the business people go, gosh, maybe we should get out of the warehouse business too. Yeah. And you have to have a good explanation about why that's not the case, why it's a good business. The people who've been around a lot and who are willing to tell you the bad news at times, those are the ones who are going to be able to go to bat for you, like Joe said.
I was just reviewing our first or one of the first audits to go. I was just reviewing. They lost money every single month. Lost a crap ton of money for the year. They're a direct to consumer shop, and I was writing all of the notes like where's the covenant violations? Why aren't we disclosing this? And sure enough, went back to the manager, and he was like, "No, they talked to the warehouse bank all throughout the year, and they got preemptively." They got the covenants changed because they knew because they were communicating. It was a good CFO, like you said. There was a good CFO. They let them know. They delivered the bad news. But you're right. They had cash and they had cash flow and stuff like that. So yeah. Sorry, Joe. I keep cutting you off. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say that, it's the way I got to be friends with Mike and ultimately partners. One of the best things that ever happened in my life. I ran a little commercial bank, and in those days, you couldn't get home loan bank borrowings overnight. And so we needed a warehouse line, and I hooked up with Mike. And what we did was we just sent him everything. We didn't just do the minimum requirement. We had board packets. We were a bank. We sent him all the board packets, and I just got to know and made certain that there was a real relationship going on there. And gosh, what was that, Mike? 30 years ago?
A long time ago. Yeah. It's our daughters around the time our daughter. So our daughter's what, about 30? Yeah. So that's about right.
Yeah. And then secondly, I was going to say that I don't know what you guys charge. I don't need to know, but everybody who's listening in is writing a check to their audit firm to some amount. And I always tell people, whatever you're paying the guy or the gals, if you're not meeting with them, having lunch once a month or every quarter, if you're not talking to them, getting together, save your money. If all you want is an audit, go find Bill and Ted's excellent audit firm down the street. The guys at CWDL and some of their competitors know the business inside out. There's nothing that Mark and Dustin haven't seen. There's so much knowledge that they have and so much experience. Take advantage of it. So with your audit firm, get to know them, have a relationship with them.
So that's another great thing. So the other thing, if you look at successful companies, when I was a bank, when I was a warehouse lender, and then now when I'm looking at companies on behalf of banks or third parties, it's the company you keep, right? So a lot of it is I'm looking right away at who do they use as their audit firm? Who's their compliance attorneys? Who do they use for business advice? Who are their warehouse banks? Who are the hedging advisors? Who are the broker dealers they work with? I think that Joe's dead on. I mean, if you sit there and look at, I was sitting on a credit committee with a bank the other day, and the CEO asked the right question. Do we know these auditors? So these people actually have any expertise in the business? What do we know about them? And you don't get that. I mean, if you have a CWDL, you don't get that, right? I mean, you immediately know that these guys, I echo what Joe says. It's sort of sacrilege to say it, but I always felt like audit firms and hedging advisors are way underpriced for the value they deliver. But I can't explain that. But
I mean, to your point, you can point to Q1 of 2020 on the broker dealer side when there was margin calls like crazy coming in. The ones that had really strong relationships got through that time. Most people got through that time just because the market changed, but the relationships matter. The key relationships across the board matter for sure. I would agree with all that.
But it's sort of cliche, but a lot of these cliches are dead on. They just, you have to, Joe makes the point, when we were working together, I was his warehouse lender. I mean, he was one of the few guys I had who actually had a board packet, and every time he'd send it to me every month. And every time I look at it, there's always something new in it. What's another way we can cut it? What's another way we can add? What's another consideration? Thing got to be what, Joe, 40 pages or something? I mean, it was.
Yeah, more than that.
And it was fascinating just going through the thing. But I think I never had a surprise once. And I've had it as a banker. That's the other tip for people is, if you haven't figured it out already, I mean, your warehouse lender, you take care of your warehouse lender, you're going to get taken care of. And even if you go through bad periods and difficult periods, you keep them informed, do what you say. You're going to have a plan, follow the plan, keep them informed as things change. If there's some kind of modifications that need to be done, they're going to be there for you at the other side. And they're going to remember that you were the one who did that versus the one who didn't do that, the one who tried to hide the ball or the one who couldn't execute. And that's going to, again, carry forward, and it'll be the best relationship you have. And I see some of the people we have on the call here today, CFOs, just, I know them, you all know them, they're your clients, they're top quality CFOs. I'm not telling them anything they don't know, but for the other folks who don't practice that, they really need to.
Here's something, Mike mentioned board packets. And Mike, what percentage of the guys that we see, the guys and gals, the companies that we see, do you think have real boards?
Real boards, I wouldn't, not that many. A lot of them are sole proprietor, sole shareholders. But do you mean, Joe, as well? What if they had a good executive group that's meeting once?
No, I mean a board of
outsourcers. Board. Okay, yeah, very very low percentage.
Very low. So Mike and I are both big proponents of that. It doesn't mean that they have to have ownership. And it may mean that you need to pay them some kind of a fee to come to the board meetings. But there's some people out there, not necessarily, in the mortgage business, but that would be ideal. People that have been in it for a while and just give a different perspective. So we see owners who, might not even necessarily listen to their top people. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But there's real value in that. And it could be a retired mortgage banker, maybe a professor of finance at a local college. But these places can be real echo chambers. Mike's on the board of, your bank is about what, 7 billion, Mike?
I think it's about 9 now, 9 billion.
9 now. The bank I'm on the board of is about 21, 22 billion. And, everyone sort of jokes about how bank boards or installed corporate boards are rubber stamps. Not really true. There's just a lot of discussion that goes on, and I think the CEOs get a lot of value from the feedback. And we'd encourage mortgage companies to do that.
But it's also, it fits with what you said regarding, Joe, the information you can get from your auditors. Why aren't you having lunch with them every month or every other month?
Yeah.
Your warehouse lenders fit into that category. Outside business advisors or board members. I think that's the other thing I see is a lot of mortgage bankers. They're working so hard. They're in a silo. They might have 1 or 2 different people who they're former mentors or buddies that they can talk to, but they don't talk to as many people as CWDL does or Garrett McAuley does or hedging advisors. Pick out what they are, what they can be particularly good at, and seek them out a lot more because you'll learn a lot more for your own business.
I think this applies to CWDL and maybe a handful of other, mortgage banking oriented auditors, but there's not a single thing that you could have as a problem that they haven't seen before and maybe seen in spades, and they've seen what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Well, I think we've gone through, a lot of the topics. I think, circling back maybe, to workforce and what to do in 2023. I mean, what are you guys seeing already for 2023? I know, Joe, you mentioned the no sacred cow concept. I mean, what are y'all, are you seeing people already preparing for more cuts? Do you see, cautious optimism like you put it in your last newsletter? Like what?
No. We referenced cautious pessimism.
Yes. You led in with cautious optimism, and then said you wish you had somebody that would say cautious pessimism with.
That's the difference. That's the difference between partly sunny and partly cloudy, Dustin. That's a big difference.
That's it.
I'll tell you one thing that's really disappointing. One thing that people are not doing is having budgets. And just because it's February and almost March, it's not too late. And a budget is a roadmap. And the way Mike always puts it, which is so eloquent, really, is if you're going to drive from San Diego to New York, you don't just get in your car and start driving east. You want to plan ahead. How long do you want to drive how many hours per day? Do you want to book some hotels in advance, et cetera, et cetera. And these roadmaps really are effective. If you get in a car and head east, you'll eventually get there. You'll get there quicker and more easily if you have a plan. And that's all a budget is. And anybody who's listening, if your client's a CWDL, call them up, for some help on how to put one together. Mike and I can help you, but a budget really, really makes a difference. We've done a very informal analysis, but over the 12 years that Mike and I have been together here, the companies that have budgets do better.
That's right.
Period. They make more money.
And they're living documents, right? It's not something you just do and throw in a drawer. You kind of look at it. I mean, just like you were saying, the analogy of a roadmap. I mean, it could change as you're going. You could, stop here. You could do that. Something to come back to and revisit and look at, not just something you do at the beginning of the year and toss in a drawer. So.
Yeah, I mean, when Mark drives across country, he always stops at Walled Drug, but then he skips the Corn Palace. But next time he's going to see the Corn Palace. Mitchell.
Yeah.
There was a mortgage banker named Peter Paul who made a couple $100 million taking his company public. And he was a friend of mine. He still is. And I attended one of his management meetings. We were going to go out for lunch. And he said, come early, just sit in. And basically the management meeting, they talked a little bit about issues of the moment. But most of it was his flogging the budget and looking at everything that was a variance in actual numbers from what was budgeted and wanting to hold everybody accountable. You said you were going to do X. Why didn't you? And that really led to huge success and huge profits. Is the accountability behind the budget, not just having it.
Yeah, no, the budget. I mean, to your point, what a budget or I like forecasts, but it's a forced plan, right? You're getting everybody together, and if you're not doing at least an annual plan with your executive team, you're just hoping that's a plan of hope, right? So having a budget or a forecast that you're looking at, and you're comparing what your plan was versus what actually happened, what happened, where we at, then I think it's a huge difference. I think
So it's like, yeah, we got somebody we were talking about before we got on here. So we got Matt Kiker. I don't know if Matt's dialed in or not on here, but he's registered. And that was something Joe and Matt and I worked on. It was Matt was the one that helped us think that way. Do some scenarios. What if we tweak the margin here? What if we do that? What's it going to look like?
Yeah.
And wouldn't you guys agree that, even if you can't do an annual budget, at least do a 3-month budget? I always get this, people will say to me, well, you tell me what happened to rates and I'll tell you what I'll do. Well, okay. So if that's, how about just picking a 3-month,
Yeah. And I'll tell you right now, management team, 3 months is not too hard to predict.
Right.
You know where your applications are today. You have a pretty good idea where you're going to be at in 3 months. Maybe it's 2 months. Maybe you have more. 60.
Just get started.
But it's I think I saw the NBA today that applications are down again. So that should be, you could dump that into your forecast and plan for that.
Yeah, I need to lose 7 pounds, but I'm starting with I got to drop 2. So just find out how I'm doing.
One at a time.
I can start 2 at first. But, Dustin, you're talking about the workforce thing. I had an interesting conversation the other day with a company. So this was a QC and compliance manager, and I was just running through with her, what was her, when we spoke a year ago, I don't remember the exact number, but for illustration purposes, you had 100 people in those categories. Let's say 10 people, make the numbers rounder. And now she's down to 6 people. And, partly that's because volume is off, but, you can't really get rid of compliance people and QC people necessarily, proportionate to volume necessarily. But, she made a good point. She said to me, the good thing for it is that even with the layoffs, subsequently, we had to go back and hire people, and we were able to get very good quality people out there, and they helped us rethink the business. We actually were able to improve our talent after the layoffs because there are so many good people out there. So, my takeaway on that is, if you're doing layoffs and you think you need to do upgrades, or as Joe said, we're on record always talking about force ranking your folks, know who that bottom quartile is, that bottom quintile. You've had on here before Jim Deitch, Jim's a friend of ours. Jim's kind of extended that concept further into your processors and your closers and your underwriters and the tools to look at that. You pare away some of the poor quality ones, but make sure somebody may be a more expensive underwriter than the others, but he or she may be more productive than that. And the same thing's true in terms of pare off some of your weaker people. That doesn't mean you can't hire better quality talent out there. And this QC manager, compliance manager, was telling me that this really allowed them to rethink how they were doing a lot of their QC. They got a lot of fresh approaches, and they're better now than they were a year ago for it with fewer people.
So what's y'all's thoughts on production? You didn't mention production, but production people, are they all created equal, or are you, we hear sometimes, well, one loan is one loan, but is that necessarily?
Joe. This is Joe. Say it, Joe.
First of all, we look at seat licenses and all that stuff, that a loan officer costs you about $1,500 a month. So, do you really want the guy that does, 2 loans every 3 months? That's number one. Secondly, the real successful companies that we see, as Mike said, they segment all their loan officers into quartiles or quintiles. And we tell the story a lot. They do a good job of getting rid of the bottom quartile, calling them in, giving them a plan, knowing that the plan is tough enough that probably they're not going to meet it, and moving them out. We have one client in the Central Valley of California. They have a wall of shame, and they put the names of all the, I think it's the bottom quintile, on a big, 3x5 thing in the lunchroom. And so it's pretty horrible, but they basically try to humiliate these bottom performers. And people just desperately, it's on the internet also, try to get their name off that.
But so that's interesting. You should say, what would we think about that? Dustin, we think that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Somebody doing one loan a month and, oh gosh, that's one more loan I wouldn't have had. That's probably being said by some production manager who's getting paid basis points on the LOs below him.
Yeah.
What's it to him, right?
But
meanwhile, the CEO, we're the four of us are out looking for the CEO, and that doesn't work for the CEO and for the shareholder,
But here's something that Mike has done a good job of focusing in on, and that's having a flatter organization chart for your production. So one of Mike's clients, I know the guy, but Mike has handled this account. You know who I'm talking about, Mike. He has, 11 branches or something that report directly to him. He's the president. Yep. It's a big number of branches. And we have other companies that if they had 11 branches, they'd have, regional managers and division managers. There'd be 3 or 4 people just sucking at the juice of this deal. So
all getting paid, all getting an override each layer.
Yeah, we think having fewer people between the CEO and the branches makes a lot of sense. I was also going to say, this is getting away from production. 10 years ago, when people talked about outsourcing, there was nothing but nightmare stories about how bad they were. They've gotten better and better. And we have one client, it's a bank back east. They do a lot of mortgage banking, huge amount. Every single thing that is not customer facing is done in India. Nobody from India talks to customers, accents and all that stuff. But setting up loans, underwriting, processing, ordering appraisals, ordering docs, you name it. And I think the last number I saw was they had calculated saved $150,000 a month, huge number. And they're a big volume shop, but also it speeds things up because while we're sleeping in America, they're working over there, so things get done more quickly. So I think it's time for people to look more seriously at that.
So Dustin, just last thing on, just to jump back on the producers. At one time, a very similar conversation, the community mortgage bankers, or it was, maybe it was the mortgage banker, the bank mortgage division people out of the MBA, they had me do a presentation. And one of our things always, I thought you were going to say it, Joe, is dump your low producers.
Yeah.
This banker was saying, that's a little harsh, and maybe we shouldn't really say that in the webinar, and maybe it'd be, you should manage your lower producers or counsel your lower producers or improve performance of your lower producers. Our thing is dump the low producers. I mean, I know that sounds harsh, but in reality, you can't soft pedal it. If you have a performance plan in place and they can't make it, you just have to, you're doing it to make sure the rest of the company survives. And you go back to talk to the operations manager at a company, they'll tell you who the hardest LOs to deal with are the ones that do half a loan a month or something like that. You ask the compliance manager where the most complex, or the underwriting manager. It's always the low producer. So just we're very clear about it and direct, and maybe a little sounds harsh, but you really do need to dump your low producers.
Mike, go ahead. No, I was just going to say we do the same thing. If you look at your typical 80-20 rule. 20% of your volume is coming from your top producers. What is the support operational cost for that other 80% when the person who does one loan a month forgets how to price a loan? Back to my point of Ford Motor building cars, I'd be like, they're putting the parts on the production line, but forgetting the wheels. And then the operation person has to go figure out how to get the wheels back on there, right? So it's a huge cost. It's more than just the seat cost, right? And 1,500 is that's a great. I haven't really heard that part before. So thanks for that, Joe. But that's
I've heard it. I've heard the numbers. Some people told me it's at least 800, others 1,000, 1,500.
Yeah,
me, it's 800. That's a lot of money.
It's even, but the efficiency drop that you get is overwhelming, to your point of the operation manager. It's huge.
And it also, this is the other one, Joe, this is your point when we talk about this, is, it just sort of shows that the organization tolerates mediocrity. You keep the lower performers. That's you don't want that. And it frankly discourages the top performers or the top quality people in this kind of a market. They know it. So
also, we've never done a study on this. It'd probably be pretty difficult, but anecdotally, we kind of heard that loan repurchases Those loans tend to have come from lower producing loan officers. And it used to be before people worked remote, we'd hear that the underwriters, always complaining about loan officers coming over and bugging them. But the guys that were the top producers were never in there because they had a machine going. It was a guy that does one loan a month that's bugging the underwriter.
Yeah. No, good stuff. Absolutely.
Are you all hearing a lot from your clients about repurchases?
That was the last topic I was going to run, and we got a couple minutes here. And just I mean, yes, we are seeing stuff pick up. Investors being a little bit more aggressive, sending stuff back. So, how about you? I mean, what do y'all see?
We hear that. We see that.
Definitely. I think the agencies are saying those who went to the IMB conference, the head of Fannie and head of Freddie QC. Were a very good panel that Pete Mills of the MBA did. By the way, I'm big fan of the IMB conference. If you don't go, you should. But they were talking about they're not actually doing more repurchases, they're doing more repurchases, but not as a percentage of the total. And it's just because there's a lot more volume out there for them to work on. But we're definitely hearing it. And we hear Freddie's harder than Fannie, but then I talked to somebody else who says Fannie's harder than Freddie. More commonly, you hear Freddie's more difficult. But I think that's the other thing we talked to, the four of us have talked about before when we got together, is you just really need to get your team, you got to get the whole process together, get ready for it, because it's going to be, there's more of it coming for sure. And investors, as things get worse, they're going to find ways or look for ways to put it back to you. So get your processes in place, get the right team together, get the right the repurchase attorneys who can help you with it. It's a lot of those people who were good in the last cycle are not around anymore. So look for them now and get it lined up before you need them.
Dustin, can I have 45 seconds?
Go for it.
So we saw a lot of companies, most of them, when they were looking at whether to retain or their servicing or sell a loan servicing release, if they could make an extra $10 or 5 basis points or whatever selling a release they did. We have seen last year, this year in particular, that boy, servicing has saved so many of our clients, that cash flow coming in. And so maybe people need to rework their models a little bit so that even if you make a little bit more selling that loan released, figure out a way to keep the servicing. I just can't tell you how many people, that's the only thing that's kept them alive, is building up the servicing.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, history repeats itself, doesn't it? I mean, the repurchase request coming back, the importance of warehouse line relationships, all of that, we're feeling we're in that cycle again, aren't we? And
well, just it's like it's the other part of it, Mark, is this is where you want good advisors, and again, going back to what we said before, it's the company you keep, so whether it's auditors or warehouse banks or business advisors or hedging firms or whatever, it's pretty obvious what makes for good relationships. This is where they're going to pay off for you.
Absolutely. Yeah,
100%.
Fully agree. And I know we're coming up to the end. I'll let everybody kind of finish it off, but I can't tell you guys how much we appreciate it as a firm to have you join us. Absolute two legends in the mortgage space, and I couldn't be more impressed that you joined us today. So thank you both very, very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
It's the company you keep.
It's the company. Mike, you just took it. That was how I was going to close the whole thing. It's the company that you keep. Definitely. Well, thank you all. If anybody needs anything, feel free to reach out. We'll be sending out a recording of the webinar. Keep an eye out for that tomorrow. We also do a survey that'll pop up at the end of this. If you guys would be so kind as to take it, it just ensures that we're staying ahead of relevant topics and making sure we're bringing you what you guys want to hear. So that being said, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all.